And we are joined once again by Professor Tracey Brame, Associate Dean of Experiential Learning and Practice Preparation at Cooley Law School. And now all 11 of the prosecution's witnesses have been called to the stand. The day ended in the middle of questioning the final witness. Now, we heard testimony, we heard this term during testimony of officer-created jeopardy. And Tracey, can you walk us through what that means and maybe about why the defense didn't want the jury to hear about it?
Absolutely. So in general, the way that the witness explained it, officer-created jeopardy is essentially unreasonable risks that heighten the chance of harm based on the officer's own conduct. And the defense was very concerned about that line of questioning because it takes the emphasis away from what, from the defense perspective, is the ultimate question: was Officer Schurr reasonably concerned, right, for his life when he employed his weapon? So by focusing on his conduct prior to that, whether he employed acceptable police practices leading up to the incident, the defense is concerned that the jury's going to be confused and maybe thinking that Officer Schurr brought this upon himself and therefore didn't have the right to claim self-defense, right? When what we should be looking at, according to the defense, is what was his state of mind at the time that he employed his weapon.
Okay, and of course the judge did rule that he was able to testify with that expertise. And we learned from some of the experts about whether or not Schurr followed best practices in those moments leading up to the shooting, in best practices in policing, kind of in a broad scale. What were some of the things that they said were reasonable based on Schurr's actions versus unreasonable?
Yes, and he used the term generally accepted practices, right? And what is kind of generally acceptable professional conduct from an officer. So in this particular instance, he said, of course, once he saw that Leola had improper plates on the car, it was proper for him to stop and inquire about that. It was even proper for him to try to contain him when he tried to get away initially. But at the point where he ran past the car and away from the car where the passenger was still seated, then he went beyond the scope of reasonableness for his own safety and for the safety of others. And then as well, his activity with the taser once he had Leola contained on the ground.
Yeah, and it seemed like I noticed at least the defense continued to ask that same question to Professor Stoughton, and he continued to have the same answer that, no, I don't believe any reasonable officer would have done X, Y, or Z in this case. Why do you think they continued to ask him that question repeatedly?
Because again, so for two reasons. So first of all, I think that they wanted to hammer that because probably in their case, they're going to talk about why what he did was reasonable. And so they, they want to make sure that they absolutely understand what's coming out with this expert. But also, the defense alluded to the taser expert, because one of the things that this witness today talked about was the fact that Officer Schurr it was not reasonable for him to be so afraid of Leola having access to a taser. Their worst case scenario, right, he still shouldn't have shot him. And according to the defense, right, this contradicts the testimony of the taser expert that we heard from yesterday. So he wants to get this witness on the record, right, so then he can, probably contrast that with the testimony that we heard yesterday.
Okay, and want to really quickly touch on, because we did hear from Brian Childs on the taser this morning as well. Just quickly, what was significant about his testimony?
So again, and that's what I said yesterday, this morning, Brian Childs was on the stand talking about the mechanics of the taser. And that was really important because the defense was able to elicit that even though a well-trained person, right, it's difficult for a well-trained person to do serious harm to someone if they use the taser correctly, an untrained person trying to do harm, right, could actually hurt somebody because they don't know what they're doing. And so, that was important testimony to elicit from the defense perspective. So he walked us through how a taser works, what the training looks like, and how it could be dangerous in the hands of an untrained person.
Yeah, so we expect tomorrow morning questioning will continue with Bloomfield, and then we expect the defense to call their witnesses as well.
We should start defense case tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Tracey, thanks so much for joining us again and for breaking all of that down for us.
Absolutely.
And you can stay with News 8 for continuing coverage of the Schurr trial from start to finish. We'll monitor all the latest developments as they come into the newsroom, both on air and in real time at woodtv.com.